Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. India is planning to cut some imports from Turkey and widen curbs on palm oil from Malaysia to oil, gas and other products, news agency Reuters reported on Wednesday. India is the world's biggest buyer of edible oils and has already effectively stopped importing palm oil from Malaysia by asking importers to look elsewhere. According to the report, New Delhi is now planning to restrict buying of petroleum, aluminium ingots, liquefied natural gas, computer parts and microprocessors from Malaysia. The same report goes on to add that the government is also planning to cut imports of oil and steel products from Turkey. Meanwhile, another Reuters report said Malaysia will use diplomatic channels to try and resolve concerns over the palm oil exports. Malaysia's Ministry of Primary Industries told an industry conference that this year Malaysia foresees more challenges in some of its major markets. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze India's relations with Turkey and Malaysia. Joining me on the program today are Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador, Jayant Das Gupta, former ambassador of India at the WTO, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Pramit, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand and try and figure out what the issue is really as far as trade between India and Malaysia and Turkey are concerned, because the MEA has come out with a statement saying that there are no real restrictions, but the media is reporting otherwise.
Yeah, I think we understand that it's not really about trade per se, but the government's policy has been that unlike in the past, criticisms of Indian policies that are seen as strictly domestic, in this case Article 370's amendment and the status of situation in Kashmir, would no longer be just handled through diplomatic channels or privately. There would be some sort of a cost would be imposed on countries that criticized India. And notably, of course, as we mentioned, Malaysia and Turkey were the ones who went out publicly and criticized the policy. And in the particular case of Mahathir, who has actually had a long record of criticizing us on Kashmir over the past, I would say, 15 or 20 years, he made some statements which were just historically inaccurate and, of course, has refused to back down. So the decision, therefore, was to at least impose some costs on both countries. And as you've mentioned, in the case of Turkey, we don't have a major trading relationship. So some contracts have been cancelled and some other actions are being considered. Malaysia, however, is a relatively large trading partner, if I remember correctly, somewhere on the $15 to $16 billion range, and of which palm oil is probably the single largest component. And that is definitely going to hurt Malaysia because we are, I believe, one of the first or second largest buyer of palm oil from that country. So in the case of the Malaysians, have already imposed a cost and will continue to do so. Mahathir, as you've mentioned, has not backed down on this issue so far. But the game will be that having imposed a certain cost is to make sure that this doesn't go out of control. Fundamentally, we do not have a hostile relationship with Malaysia, or for that matter, really too much with Turkey. So therefore, it has to be calibrated carefully so it does not become a genuine trade war or affect a larger bilateral relationship.
All right. Ambassador Das Gupta, there is an issue really as far as palm oil is concerned. There is no denying that. How much of an impact is it having on Malaysia's economy? Because Malaysia has already spoken about how it wants to talk to India or come to the negotiating table and try and sort out that particular issue. And how much of an impact does it have on India as well?
Palm oil accounts for about 2.5% of Malaysia's GDP and about 4.5% of its exports. And India is its largest buyer. We buy about 9 million tons of palm oil between Malaysia and Indonesia. So, and in fact, the palm oil imports from Indonesia have gone down from about 3.4 to about 4.3 to about 3 point something billion dollars. And from Malaysia, they have increased last year, that is in 2019. So whatever Indonesia lost, we have actually been importing more from Malaysia by way of refined palm oil. Now, if that is going to go back again to square one, Indonesia is going to gain as a result. And of course, there is enough refining capacity for palm oil in India, so our consumers are not going to suffer very much. But the impact on Malaysia, especially on people who are working in this sector, and there are a lot of rural workers, that will get affected, and there is going to be a political cost to pay for Malaysia.
Okay, since we're here, Ambassador, let's talk about focus on Malaysia first, and we can probably talk about Turkey a little later in the program. What is the status of the bilateral relationship now that all of this has happened with regards to 370 and Kashmir and the statements that Mahathir has made between India and Malaysia?
You know, actually within ASEAN, Malaysia is one of our better friends in many ways. And if you may recall that when Prime Minister Mahathir got re-elected, Prime Minister Modi actually cut short his visit to Indonesia by a few hours and flew to Kuala Lumpur to personally greet a senior statesman. So the idea was that this relationship is going places and it can now do more. Unfortunately, despite Prime Minister Modi's special gesture, the response that Prime Minister Mahathir has said has been much more out of character than even in the past. Not only has he chosen to speak about internal matters of India publicly, he has done it at what we call the highest level, the UN General Assembly, and so did Turkey for that matter. Now, there are many countries who have spoken to the Indian government, but in confidence about some of their concerns on some of our internal matters, but they don't go public with it. The problem with these two countries is that they've gone public and they openly sided with Pakistan and saying they have a stake and Kashmir as an issue. And with Malaysia, the problem has been not only the J&K question, but their vacuous comments on the CAA and the fact that Zakir Naik is holed up there and they're giving him permanent residency and not taking our request for his extradition with any degree of seriousness. And I think as late as the non-aligned ministerial meeting in Azerbaijan just maybe 2 months ago, when EAM met their minister, these issues were raised, but they are not coming around to playing ball. So the relationship with Malaysia was that strategically and politically, we are not on the same page, but yet the economic relations seem to be flourishing. So when you have to now react, what is it that you can do? So you try and for the first time and notice India using these tactics bilaterally. And we, for instance, we have used them in favor of a general principle like say apartheid. We put sanctions in South Africa for many, many years saying this is, you don't agree with your principle. But very rarely have we done in a non-war situation a kind of a sanction on a country, but a limited one. So sanctions normally have, export controls, import controls, and, non-tariff barriers and many such things. So I think in the case of Malaysia, what we are seeing is a level of import control by us. And I think you will see more of non-tariff barriers and stronger inspections of things like microprocessors and electronics. So besides palm oil, I think India is also a big importer of TVs and other electronics from Malaysia. And I know that in India, the market for that seems to be falling this year. But nevertheless, I think we are going to restrict imports on that. I think an interesting point was made here that the Ministry of External Affairs says that there is no particular reason, but in practice things are happening. This is quite an interesting play because I think the sanctions that we are trying to use, we are putting the perception building of the sanction above the substance. So international perception and domestic perception that India is now getting back at people who react to us in a rather bad way. So this is good. Now it comes to the substance. Will there be real deterrence? Will the policies of these countries change? On that, this takes longer to understand. And I think what you said in your opening remarks, that now Malaysia says we are going to adopt diplomacy to try and see how we can recover this. And I think Malaysia may in turn also offer that we'll buy more sugar, more buffalo meat and things like that. You did mention Indonesia. Indonesia is an interesting example. They do nothing to promote the trade with India. They are waiting for Malaysia to go down so they can benefit from the trade. And as Mr. Das Gupta mentioned, when they went down, the Malaysians gained. But today, the countervailing duties which have been imposed raise the duty on palm oil to 50% for Malaysia and 45% for Indonesia. So my question now is, what is Indonesia going to do to balance the trade with India by buying more? They have been promising to buy more sugar from us. Now, where? I have not seen that happen. So with all these ASEAN countries, though we have an India-ASEAN FTA, with some like Singapore, Malaysia, we also have bilateral, but we don't have with Indonesia. But I think all of them need to play better ball with us. And I am happy to see that India has decided to take a firm stance. The results of it will come. But as I said, the international and domestic perception that we are going to stand up for ourselves and use trade as a tool is an important step.
Okay, so the times have changed, and the way India deals with the foreign powers also has changed, is what the ambassador is suggesting. That's something that the foreign minister also said and spoke about at the Raisina dialogue. Pramit, it's let me go back to a point that you were making, and that the ambassador also touched upon it right now. What has prompted this sudden change of heart, or the way Malaysia has started behaving with India and started moving towards Pakistan? Is it, are they domestic compulsions, or what is it really that has changed things?
My guess is that it's not, and I'm not going, I can only speculate, that Mahathir is not particularly interested in Pakistan per se. There isn't much to gain from wooing Pakistan. But my understanding is that he is effectively in a power tussle with his political partner, Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar Ibrahim's support base has been Islamic parties and movements in Malaysia. And Mahathir, to some degree, is trying to outflank him with the Islamic card, if you wish. So he's not only attacked us, he's gone after Israel on the Palestine issue and so on. So my sense is that he's trying to use this to balance for his own domestic political compulsions. And therefore, India has traditionally not reacted to these type of things publicly or in any tangible fashion. So he may have thought this was a relatively easy bogey to hit and gain some points domestically. Mahathir himself is partly of Indian origin. He is Tamil. I think one of his grandparents is Tamil. So he has always tried to out more Malay than others in the political system, if you wish, ethnically, to compensate for his Indian background. And so that's another reason he's often gone after India in particular. So my sense is that it's largely a domestic play, but I think the message that India is trying to send is, you can play domestic politics if you want, but if you're going to try to use India to gain votes, you're going to have to pay a domestic price as well.
All right. So, in all of this, Ambassador Dasgupta, your thoughts on India's trade diplomacy and how it is shaping up and how things are going to be going forward?
Well, I wouldn't put this as part of trade diplomacy because, it was quite unfair of Malaysia and Turkey to raise it in the UN and in September last year. And then, of course, this statement about the CAA came on the 20th of December 2019. And both of them were not really called for. And I quite agree with Pramit when he says that it is part of the domestic, positioning and posturing and power play between the two partners. But there is also another angle to it, and that is, I think, Turkey especially, from what I see, and Malaysia, are trying to wrest the leadership of the Islamic countries in a subtle way away from Saudi Arabia. Turkey has been at it for quite some time. So the conference which they organized in Kuala Lumpur, to which Pakistan was invited, and Imran had also given his assent to it, and then at the last moment he cried off, and he didn't even send a minister to attend that meeting. So that is all of a piece with what Mahathir has been trying to do. But having said that, I think the best part of this whole episode is that the Solvent Extractors Association of India, they advised their members not to buy refined palm oil from Malaysia. There was no government directive, there is no government order or direction to this effect. So we are in the clear as far as the government is concerned, and Mahathir has to either sort it out and promise to make amends, or this stalemate continues. But having said that, this should be used only as a last resort, and only when the provocation is grave enough. It should not be used at every turn and of events. So we have to use it sparingly so that it has value. And there is this fear also that if you upset the diplomatic boat and you go out of your way to criticize India at international fora, there is a price to pay.
Okay, all right, Ambassador, let's talk about Turkey now. There was a high-level state visit that was cancelled in October 2019 as well, as far as India and Turkey were concerned. So where does all this go as far as the bilateral relationship between India and Turkey is concerned?
Turkey is one of those enigmatic countries. And the relationship with India is perhaps one extreme of the enigma. It is ideal that two countries of the South with similar interests should actually be working together. And if you look at our outgoing ambassador's statements and interviews in the last few days, I think he emphasizes all this. And so there is much to do together. But just there are quite a few contradictions which emerge from Turkey's own worldview. Please remember that Turkey long back was a member of CENTO, the Baghdad Pact, with Pakistan and Iraq. But as things go on, the military relationship between Turkey and Pakistan is not diminishing. They continue to have joint exercises in the naval sphere and other things. So India has been a little bit quiet, at least in the last 5 years or so, on Turkey's political ambitions, hoping to build a functional and economic engagement, because there are many areas where we can work together. It is Central Asia, Africa for one. But I think Turkey has decided that there is not that much. After all, that is one of the few countries with whom actually we are running a trade surplus. So we import very little from Turkey. We export more. So if you have too much of trade imbalance, trade sanctions, you will perhaps lose rather than gain. But at the same time, the Turkish company who was trying to enter the Indian defense field, I think they have been now going to be shut out. So it is there in not so much the trade, but the fact that new engagements will perhaps be put on hold. But Turkey needs to decide where is it going. And I think Ambassador Dasgupta did mention it already, that there is this Islamic factor. Now, if you look back, India's successful engagement with Saudi Arabia and UAE led to the two foreign ministers of these countries telling the Pakistanis that Jammu and Kashmir is not a matter of the Muslim Ummah. Now, following what they say, what Mahathir and to an extent Turkey are trying to do is pull the rug from the feet of these Ummah leaders, Saudi Arabia and UAE, and set up their own version and say, no, we are. And in which trying to pull Pakistan and therefore making Kashmir the issue was perhaps an important step. But I think, as always, money talks louder than strategy. So the fact that Saudi and the UAEs are actually bailing the Pakistanis out gave them enough leverage to prevent Pakistan from going to this so-called summit in Malaysia. But I really don't know where the summit was going, because even the Indonesians didn't participate. So it is a half-hearted attempt, but certainly an attempt by these two countries to find a new role for themselves, in which perhaps somewhat at the cost of India. And I think what is very clear, India is not ready to bear that cost. And we are going to react to them in a strong way.
Okay, taking this particular aspect forward, Pramit, is India going to be affected at all as this drama plays out in the Islamic world for supremacy, for one-upmanship?
Well, as has been mentioned, the Islamic world has a problem in the sense, at least especially the Arab world, if you wish, that there are now many contenders to be the leader of the Islamic world. You have, as mentioned, Turkey and its so-called neo-Ottoman policy. You have the Iranians, obviously. You have always had the Sauds. The Iraqis are not completely out of the picture. They still talk about coming back and one day becoming, resurrecting themselves. The Egyptians still point out that they are the biggest of the Arab nations. So yes, and the present chaos in the Middle East has made all these countries believe that they are in a position to play this role. India, I think it's not concerned really about that larger picture. But what has happened is that partly because of this chaos, partly because of the slow but steady withdrawal of US influence and interest in that region, we've been able to win more friends than we've ever had before. And particularly, as we've mentioned, the United Arab Emirates and then Saudi Arabia, a country that we've never had we've had a very testy relationship with. And both of them have been very close friends of Pakistan, have now essentially said that no, the relationship with India is actually more important, both for economic, but even to some degree for strategic reasons, with Abu Dhabi in particular being far ahead of the pack on this issue. But then now, to some degree, Oman, Qatar, even maybe a little bit Kuwait, all of these countries now looking to India in a manner they've never really looked at before. We've always been close to them, but now it's a very different game, and they really see us as something that's happening in the future. And Pakistan's credentials have really fallen dramatically, partly because their economy is in such terrible shape. Their GDP is, I think, officially now smaller than Bangladesh in dollar terms, and in fact, it's smaller than the city of Mumbai in dollar terms. So their ability to play any economic cards is zero. The Americans have almost completely lost interest in them. So as a consequence, Pakistan struggles. But what it does happen, though, is that other countries like Turkey and Malaysia continue to believe they can use the India, the pick up this narrative of Muslims being persecuted or maltreated in other parts of the world, whether it's Israel and India or the Rohingyas, and use that to strengthen their political position both at home and within the Islamic world. So I think what basically India's overall strategy has to be is through a combination, preferably of carrots and sticks, is to say that, look, you can do what you want in terms of your ambitions elsewhere, but you have to recognize that the Indian story is not part of that narrative, and we want you to keep it out of it. And if you do decide to bring that narrative, in that case, you're going to have to pay a price.
Sure.
Turkey is a little harder, as was mentioned. We don't have that close an economic relationship with them. But Malaysia is definitely something we do have the ability to inflict some pain.
Okay. Two big developments on the trade front that have taken place over the last couple of days, Ambassador Dasgupta. One, of course, is that the FM talking about how RCEP is really not completely out of the picture. That is one. Second, of course, the US-China trade deal. So how are all of these events going to play out in the days to come, and what kind of an impact is it going to have on us?
First, I'll talk about the US-China trade deal, the phase one of the trade deal. And I think, China, really speaking, has not gained much out of this deal. It is possibly a stopgap arrangement on the way to the November elections in the US. And China is also hedging its bets. If, the elections bring back the same president, they'll go back again to the negotiating table and then have a longer term agreement. Because the concessions that China seems to have made are all on their part, and the US doesn't seem to have made any concessions at all. On the second part of the RCEP agreement, I think the main cause was the growing trade deficit with China without any hope of seeing the trend reversed. Because if you look at the figures for the past 5-6 years, the trade deficit with China has been increasing year on year.
Right.
And only last year, of course, there was a great hullabaloo that it has actually decreased. But when you took into account the exports that Hong Kong made, or China made through Hong Kong, it actually had gone up.
Sure.
And it is the same this year as well. The figures have just come out. Of course, the overall trade with China has shrunk by about $3 billion. But there are reasons for that. China has also not been, very active on the cotton market, for instance. It's bought less cotton.
Right.
And China's, economy has not been as growing as fast as it was earlier. So RCEP, the problem still remains. Underlying problem, the elephant in the room. It is about China. How does it intend? And while I'm on it, I'll just mention that Indian, investments in China have been, I think, less than $1 billion, $0.9 billion. But, because of its huge trade surplus, China, has gained about $700 odd billion vis-a-vis India. And China's investment into India has been less than $6 billion. It's just about $5.5 billion.
Right.
So there is no recompense. There is no hope that, we can put it back on the rails unless China commits very firmly. And there are, measures which we can build into an agreement, which it will have to be an India-China agreement, which will first have to be arrived at, then only we can get into RCEP.
Okay, all right. And Ambassador Singh, close the show for us with your
I
concluding
think I
remarks.
agree with
The best way
Ambassador
forward.
Dasgupta indeed that I think the RCEP ultimately was an India-China issue and in the later stages an issue between India, Australia and New Zealand, because they are the only three countries with whom we did not have an FTA. With ASEAN we already have an FTA with some bilaterals as well. So I don't think RCEP was making much of a thing. But I think in the last few years, we were running a trade deficit with 11 of the 16 countries, 15 countries in RCEP. Now, he's right, China is the issue. So if you come down, that China as a country is also trying to always contain India and use their economic muscle to make sure that we don't acquire the international space that we need. Neither do they allow us to search in our own way of an equitable international order. They pay lip service to it, but they will always ground you, whether it's in NSG or wherever. Now, they have done absolutely nothing to redress the trade imbalance with India.
Right.
As he said, no great investment, and Indian exports to their country continue to face non-tariff barriers. So this is a big battle. But China is not a small country and perhaps is much more important in geostrategically than. So I don't think the kind of action we have done with Malaysia and Turkey you're going to see with China. But
true.
This is a different level of engagement.
Okay.
But I think there also we need to be certain that economics now must take the lead.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.